Hello crafty friends and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be sharing two cards that I created using one big focal point image. We have lots of watercoloring and some beautiful highlights. Well, watercoloring for me is fairly new and I must say very intimidating. But I'm so glad I tried it on these two cards today. Before we get started, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time I post a new video. Let us first take a look at the stamp set that I'll be using today. This is the Flourishing Garden set by Altenew. This set features an exquisite floral bouquet which I thought was perfect for my watercoloring today. This also includes 28 sentiments that you can add to your projects, including 4 big sentiments that can be paired well with the smaller sub-sentiments. Now this comes with a coordinating die that will cut out the huge floral image along with the 4 bold sentiments. I also have coordinating stencils, which makes it a lot more easier to color in and add shading to all those beautiful flowers. But for today, we will be using only the stamp and the die and skip the stencil. Instead, we will be adding some beautiful heat embossing to create an outline for our watercolors. I started by placing a sheet of watercolor cardstock on my stamping tool. This entire focal point image is definitely bigger than a standard A2 size card front, so you can definitely use it to create two cards instead of one. The watercolor panel that I'm using here measures 6 by 8.5 inches, which I can cut later to have two card fronts. Now, since I'm heat embossing on this panel, I will make sure that I run my anti-static powder tool well to make sure that the powder sticks only to the stamped image. Also note that unlike your regular cardstock, the watercolor cardstock is a little more rough on the surface, so you need to make sure that you powder it up well before you stamp your focal point image. I used white pigment ink to stamp my image since I will be using white embossing powder. You could also use gold embossing powder to make your coloring a lot more easier. I must say, I did struggle a bit having white on white. It was really difficult to find the margins, making sure that my color does not bleed outside the line. In future, I would probably try stamping the image using lighter shade of distress inks, but I'm still in a beginner stage of watercoloring, so I feel the embossing powder creates wells, which helps with the flow of color within the lines. I will be using my Spring Garden set watercolor brush markers by Altenew. I absolutely love this set. It has some really bright and vibrant colors. And well, I have been using this for so many different projects. I decided to experiment with my colors for these cards, and since there were so many flowers, I decided to add a mix of colors to each of them. Well, you will see later in the video that I almost used all of the colors from the set. Now, as I begin with my watercoloring, it might be a little difficult for you guys to see that on camera, but once I get to a certain point where there's a lot of color on the paper, you will know exactly where the flowers are and what petal I'm coloring. I started by applying a generous amount of water on a clean brush on one of those petals and then dipped the tip of the pink watercolor as an outline to the petals. You will see that the water pulls in all the color towards the center. Well, nothing fancy here. Just like I did for the pink color, I did the same for the next color, which was purple. All I needed to do is touch the tip to the water puddle and the embossed line created a well, which made sure that my ink does not fall out of those stamped lines. I also made sure that I was coloring in alternate petals just so that the colors don't bleed into each other. I used pink, purple and yellow for the two big flowers, and for the smaller flowers, I used orange and yellow. The flowers on the other side, I used pink and yellow. I am absolutely in love with this color combination. Like I mentioned, I was just trying to play with the colors here and making sure that I had some really bright and vibrant petals. Once I was done with all the flowers, I used two shades of green to color in the leaves. You will also notice that I used my heat gun at some point to make sure that my layers are dry before I either added more color or if I was planning on coloring an adjacent petal or leaf. Sorry my head gets in the way a couple of times, but the white on white definitely made it a lot more difficult to find the edges of the stamped image. I think I would have probably chosen gold embossing powder had I known I would take such a long time to do this. Also, this part of the video is highly sped up. I must have taken almost an hour to color these flowers. I know it looks nowhere close to anything professional, but I surely had a lot of fun coloring the stamped image. For my leaves and stems, I used two shades of greens. Using the exact same technique that I used for my flowers, I colored in my leaves as well. Now, if you're using your coordinating stencils, this set has a pack of 6 stencils, which helps you create beautiful details on these flowers. You could also choose a specific family of colors to add in your shadows and depth to the image. I should also mention that the set comes with a 3D embossing folder as well, which is, well, not the exact same floral image, but has some charming small little flowers that would create beautiful backgrounds with an intricate design. I then used a lighter shade of brown to fill in the flower centers. Now at this point, this image looks very flat, so I decided to bring in my alcohol markers to add some shadows and depth to our floral images. Please note that the white embossing powder resisted all of our watercolor, but it might not resist the alcohol markers. So while I'm using my alcohol markers to apply shading to my petals, I will make sure that I don't touch the edges. Well, there are a couple of places where the color gets into the embossed lines, which I will later fix with my white gel pen. You will notice that I'm using alcohol markers in the same color family. I have the same pinks, purples, yellows, and oranges for my flowers. I'm very lightly, in a stroke-like motion, swiping my alcohol markers from the edge towards the center of the petals. I'm absolutely loving this technique of using alcohol markers. You will see the difference it gives. You can very easily compare the flower that has the shading as compared to those which doesn't. Well, I'm so sorry that at some point my camera stopped recording all of that shading technique. But I did the same exact thing for all of the flowers and the leaves. Once I was satisfied with all the colors and shadows, I then used the coordinating die to cut out this huge floral image. Next, I have two A2 size watercolor panels, which will be the backgrounds for our card today. Now I'm using watercolor panels because on both these backgrounds, we will be having some more fun with watercolors. I placed my panel on a microfiber cloth to catch all of that mess. For our first card background, I'll be creating a wood grain-like effect on our background, essentially creating a pattern paper look. For that, I started by applying a generous amount of water onto the entire panel. Then using the very light shade of brown, I started adding color to my panel. I'm adding color in vertical strokes, making sure that I don't blend the color a lot. I would want each of those lines to stand out, which will give a lot more wood grain look. If you want a softer look, you could definitely blend all of those lines. I will be using my heat gun to dry the panel before adding more layers of color and strokes on these panels. If you want a more deeper wood grain look, I would recommend waiting for each of those layers to dry completely before adding new lines and strokes. I went in for a medium look, so there's not a lot of layering of colors happening here. Well, I'm really happy with the end result. I love how beautiful this panel turned out. I will now set it aside to dry completely while I work on our second card background. For background number 2, we will be creating a watercolor drip effect, which I feel is a very organic way to add color to your card background. And well, there's no wrong way to do it. I will start by spraying almost 3/4 of our panel with water. I will saturate this end of the panel so that it will allow easy flow of the color down the panel. I chose bright blue and purple for this drip effect. All I did was touch the tip of the marker onto the water surface and, well, water and gravity did the magic. I held the paper upright so that the color and water could easily slide down the card panel, creating a beautiful trickle down effect. If you feel the color does not flow as you wanted it to, you could add some extra water using your paintbrush. I feel this drip technique would also be perfect to create a rainbow background. I would definitely give that a try in my next project. The bright and vibrant rainbow colors would blend beautifully with each other. Unlike the previous technique where I wanted to dry each of those layers before adding in a new layer, Here, I didn't have to wait for the color to dry before pouring in more of that beautiful vibrant color. Also, you will see the microfiber cloth catches all of that drip, which makes cleanup so much more easier. Now, here's a side by side look of both the panels that we created today. It does look a lot messy right now, but the end product is absolutely stunning. I must say that the pictures also don't do justice to these cards. In real life, they're absolutely beautiful and vibrant. Now, while my panels are drying, I'm just trying to see where and how I can place these focal point image to create beautiful card fronts. Also trying to figure out the orientation of these cards. While my panels were drying, I went ahead and cut my focal point image, which I was then able to place on each of those card fronts. I placed them using some foam tape for an extra dimension. I love the contrast between the yellow flowers and the blue background, and also beautiful florals which cover our wood grain background. Well, the wood grain background does look a little washed out. Probably next time when I give it a try, I would love to add more layers of lines and strokes of colors, or maybe even add some darker shades of browns to create a more contrast effect. But I do love this look too. Well, I'm definitely not done with my watercolors. I had to add some splatters to these beautiful backgrounds. I used gold metallic watercolors and some heavy drops of black watercolor on both these card fronts. Now, while those watercolor splatters dry, I worked on my sentiments. Now, I used the Big Hug sentiments from the same stamp set and stamped and heat embossed it using some gold embossing powder and die cut it using the coordinating dies. Well, I did stack up the sentiments. I added two extra die cuts to give it a more dimensional look. Then, using my liquid glue, I adhered both these sentiments onto the card front. Last but not the least, before adhering these panels onto a standard A2 size card base, I decided to add some highlights to our flowers. I'm using my white gel pen to add light strokes on our petals and leaves. Well, I'm not at all using a heavy hand on these strokes and very gently. Rather, I'm almost not touching the paper while I'm applying these strokes. That that is what I feel gives it a more natural look, which is not something I would do if I was highlighting, say, a critter or a bold sentiment or any other stamped image. Here I'm taking my time to work on each of those petals, adding very light highlights to each of them. I also added little dots on all of the flower centers using the white gel pen and covered up any of that ink, the alcohol ink, which was on the white embossed lines. Initially, when I started coloring these flowers, well, by the time I reached petal number 3 or 4, I was really not sure of what exactly I was trying to do. Really not confident with my coloring. But well, once I stuck the stamped image on those beautiful backgrounds, I think now I love these cards. And well, the white highlights was exactly what it needed. I love how these cards turned out. The colors here are so super vibrant. There's so much going on in both these cards. Not just that beautifully blended watercolors, but I am also really happy with the shadows that I created using the alcohol markers too. The white highlights and the watercolor splatters definitely add to the beauty of these cards. Well, I hope you had fun watching today's video. I sure did. Had a lot of fun creating these cards. Don't forget to check out my blog post where I'll have some more details about these projects. All the supplies that I used in today's video will be linked down in the description box below. Please know that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.